This is part 1 on my series discussing rich billionaires from foreign nations that are pulling the strings on Canadian political activism in order to fund their own goals. This is part 1 where I'll be discussing the tar sands campaign. Part 2 I already know will be discussing Lead Now, their involvement with the tar sands campaign, and other campaigns that they have orchestrated. I am unclear as to how many parts will be in this series. I just plan to keep following the rabbit hole for as deep as it goes.
You profit from fear and hate, hoarding wealth and amassing power. The walls have been unleashed. We will not submit or cower. It's humanity's darkest side. We are ruled by thieves and liars.
America is a country of wealth. They are one of the only countries that is nearly completely self-sufficient. They have an abundance of oil that can supply the country. So does Canada. Yet time and time again, a monkey wrench has been thrown into our tar sands, from pipelines being aborted to carbon taxes. But there is more going on than just the environmentalists putting up a fight to end the use of a carbon-based fuel in exchange for renewable energy. But there is actively a plan to landlock Canadian oil. This has been an article I have sat on, brought up on my podcast, and have shared with many people to explain why our oil industry, one of our most profitable natural resources, is slowly being eroded. However, the stupid mistake I made was not looking below the surface. This is what I had been told to do, but yet I let the obvious pass me by. Who is Corp Ethics? Why are they financing this, and who is financing them? These are the questions I have not asked myself. Recent revelations have brought me back to this article and persuaded me to look deeper. Recently, Vivian Krause spoke to Global News about the American lobbyists that are actively behind this campaign to landlock our oil sands. Yes, our neighbor is trying to limit our exports, hurt the Canadian economy, all for their own benefit. Their names are well known, but we shall get there soon. Corp Ethics has been an organization that has been on the forefront of this movement. They are an environmental activist group. It states on their website, in 2003, Michael Marks, PhD, founded Corp Ethics, originally named Corporate Ethics International, in response to environmental, health, animal rights, and labor non-governmental organizations, NGOs. In the early 1990s, Michael transitioned out of corporate and legal consulting to become an environmental activist, working for NGOs like Rainforest Action Network, Forest Ethics, which he co-founded, Corp Ethics, which he founded, and the Sierra Club. He helped lead several international campaigns to improve the environmental and human rights practices of major corporations like Mitsubishi, Home Depot, Staples, PepsiCo, and Walmart. Michael also founded the Business Ethics Network, which is comprised of US NGOs that engage in corporate campaigns. But it goes further than that. The tar sand campaign itself is funded and started by a coalition of the Tides Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, paying upwards of $28 million to 75 different First Nations and environmental groups to oppose the pipelines and expansion of the Alberta oil sands. The Tides Foundation itself has spent more than $35 million funding nearly 100 anti-pipeline groups between 2009 and 2015. Have you ever wondered why we hear so much from native leaders who are arguing against pipelines, yet almost never hear from those native leaders who support the pipelines being built? It's because many of the native leaders have been paid off to speak out and raise hell over the expansion of pipelines to stop them from being made. Now, initially, many would assume that the reason for the tar sand campaign is to protect the environment and move away from fossil fuels, but this is not even close to the real reason. The real reason is because of profit. The Rockefellers had a monopoly on the oil industry. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller started up Standard Oil, which eventually split into be both Exxon and Mobil. George Soros has recently made huge profits on the oil industry, about $160 million. As we look into Corp Ethics partners, we can see that the same organization pop up and are funded by the exact same people for the exact same reasons. The Sierra Club has received funding from the Sea Change Foundation. It also gave money to the Tides Foundation, a well-known George Soros foundation. The Washington Post reported back in 2017 that Soros gave more than $75.5 million to 10 of the same environmental nonprofits that also received funding from the Sea Change Foundation. They also are listed in the Tides Foundation 2007 grantee list. The current executive director of the Sierra Club is Michael Brune, who spent several years working for the executive director for the Rainforest Action Network, another NGO involved with core ethics tar sand campaign. The club itself is more than 100 years old and has a long history of environmental activism. During the 2018 midterms, they endorsed a number of Democrats who supported environmental issues. The current president of the Sierra Club is Lauren Blackford. Oddly enough, there is no information available on her through the Sierra Club's website. Once I dug a little deeper, I found that she was a representative of the Paris Climate Agreement. The Paris Climate Agreement are nothing to support, as they are another way of the UN exerting control over sovereign nations, a lot like the Compact for Migration. The Paris Agreement is another con perpetrated by the United Nations.
Now, has anything changed post the Paris Accords? And let's use the date 2030, as this is supposed to be an important date per the Paris Accords. And these consumers pay some fee for these products, and guess what? They're still polluting. And I'll give you some numbers on this. In fact, they're polluting a lot more, as we'll see. But something very interesting happens. For the pollution they do, they have to now pay an organization, which I'm going to call, in double quotes, the IPCC. And this group is composed of people like Al Gore, people like the Bushes, many people from the commodities market, and essentially a global elite in here of quote-unquote scientists. A dollar goes here, dollars go in, and these people deliver these people something called carbon credits. And what this allows these companies to do now is to pollute, but in order to pollute, they have to pay this organization a fee, and this organization issues carbon credits.
Forest Ethics Foundation now goes by the name Stand Earth, as it states on their website. Focusing on tar sands oil and fracked shale, Stand Earth's fossil fuel campaign works to defeat existing and proposed transportation infrastructure like oil trains and pipelines. On North America's Pacific coast, we are in the midst of a public outreach campaign to defeat Kinder Morgan's proposed Trans Mountain Pipeline, a project that would increase coastal tanker traffic by 700% with a capacity exceeding the Keystone XL pipeline. Stand Earth has received funding from the Tides Foundation. In fact, Prime Minister Harper called them out for it back in 2012. They are one of the groups responsible for the Northern Gateway pipeline being stopped. Once again, we can turn to the great work of Vivian Krause when she wrote an op-ed for the Financial Post in 2016. We can even see the funding through the Tides Foundation list of grantees from 2007 and the grantees of 2012. The Rockefellers have also given money to Stand Earth. We can find this on the Rockefeller Brothers Fund grantee list. Their funding goes back from 2003 to 2006 for protecting ecosystems and biodiversity. Then there is a gap in funding until 2013, but that funding continued up to the present day, that is for advancing solutions for climate change. The Tides Foundation was also responsible for the anti-pipeline protests for the Keystone XL project. On November 8, 2018, it has been announced that the Keystone XL pipeline has been suspended by U.S. District Judge Brian Morris, pending a new environmental review before it can be continued. Stand Earth also had a part in taking down the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline. They hid behind the First Nation communities that was protesting as well, but they still played their role. They have even admitted that there are Americans that are trying to stop the expansion of Canadian pipelines. As we can see, US citizens crowdfunded to have an ad against pipelines played in Ottawa called Dearest Justin.
Dear Justin, America has a ginormous crush on you, so please don't break our hearts. When your piercing blue eyes raised taxes on the rich, we swooned. When those rippling abs built a gender-balanced cabinet, we sighed. When your curly locks fought to take in thousands of Syrian refugees, we purred like kittens. You're a burning hunk of pro-science, pro-gay, pro-universal healthcare, and pro-legal weed yumminess. Unlike another guy we know, you actually think before you speak, with those pouty lips.
When it comes to Trans Mountain, American representatives met with our federal government to try and convince them to not proceed with the pipeline. Forget Russiagate, this is true political manipulation. Dogwood Initiative is another organization that is actively working for the tar sands campaign. Most people will probably be familiar with them because of the controversy surrounding the Summer Jobs Program. The Liberal government gave funding from the Summer Jobs Program to Dogwood BC, who then turned around and hired people to protest the Kinder Morgan pipeline. They have had a profound impact on limiting the Alberta oil sands. As stated before, they have had an active role in preventing the Kinder Morgan expansion, but also the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline. They have also had a hand in producing Bill C-48, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. This act prohibits oil tankers from carrying more than 12,500 tons of oil from anchoring itself in Canada, specifically on the west coast. General purpose oil tankers carry between 10,000 and 24,000 tons of crude oil, effectively destroying the ability to export our oil from our coastlines to other countries. As we look at the oil tanker map, we can see that the oil tankers are active all across the globe, but activity along the western coast of BC are almost non-existent. This is even before the law has been passed, meaning that the legislation will effectively kill any oil tanker activity along the BC coast. Bill C-48 has already passed 3 readings in Parliament and has passed 2 readings in the Senate, meaning it is really close to being passed into law. Remember what I said in the Core Ethics Tar Sand campaign. From the very beginning, the campaign strategy was to landlock the tar sands so their crude oil could not reach international markets where it could fetch a higher price per barrel. Trudeau's Liberals are working to carry out this plan, and they are really close to succeeding. Worst of all, they are doing this for the financial benefit of a few American billionaires looking to make a profit. According to Wikipedia, researchers and pundits affiliated with the fossil fuel industry have criticized Dogwood for accepting donations from the US-based funder and charities such as the Tides Foundation. In an interview with journalist Markham Hislop, political scientist Keith Brownie said Mountain Royal University said such claims are, quote, bordering on conspiracy theory, end quote. Well, this is no conspiracy theory. They are listed on the Tides Foundation list of grantees. They don't appear to be funded by the Rockefellers, however. Despite this, it seems to be in contradiction to one of their other campaigns, the Ban Big Money campaign, that is looking to ban corporations, unions, and out-of-province donations, as well as limiting individual contributions to $1,200 for any political party. In November 2017, the BC government passed legislation to ban these organizations. Granted, Dogwood is an activist group and not a political party, but considering they engage in political activity and lobbying, it seems to be hypocritical and a conflict of interest. Another organization involved with core ethics is the Rainforest Action Network. They have spent much of their time focusing on deforestation in the rainforest, as their name suggests. Since their founding, they have branched out into other environmental work. Recently, they entered the tar sands campaign. As stated in their 2016-2017 annual report, they have successfully pressured 9 major US European banks, including Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley, to adopt new standards of reducing investment in coal projects. Now, they are trying to pressure JP Morgan Chase to change policies on investing in fossil fuel projects. They even stated in this report that any new tar sand infrastructure is incompatible with the Paris Climate Agreement. This is almost verbatim what the principles of the tar sand campaign are. They specifically outline the pipelines of TransCanada, Kinder Morgan, Trans Mountain, and Enbridge's Northern Gateway. The Kinder Morgan and Enbridge projects have either been stopped or put in limbo. Rainforest Action Network lists their supporters, and their names are quite familiar. I feel I am getting too repetitive by saying that they are funded by the Rockefeller's Brother Fund with at least $100,000 of funding and as high as $200,000, as well as the Rockefeller Family Associates. The Tides Foundation has given more than $50,000 in 2007 and just under $50,000 in 2012. They also list the Ford Foundation as a supporter. Many times, the Ford Foundation is within spitting distance of the Tides Foundation. Last time I reported on them, it was in episode 81 of the podcast, Mass Migration Warfare, Cause and Funding. The Ford Foundation was responsible for funding a lot of the same immigration NGOs that were lobbying world governments to allow mass amounts of immigrants into countries such as Canada, US, Germany, France, UK, and other European countries. They helped fund the large immigrant influx of 2015. Now they are helping to fund the tar sands campaign. Their list of financial supporters is huge. There must be more than 100 foundations and organizations that give monetarily to the Rainforest Action Network. Oil Changers International, as described by Corp Ethics website, is the go-to organization in the climate movement for oil industry analysis. It tracks industry development and provides valuable strategic guidance to other NGOs working to end our dependence on oil. Despite this, they work with a small staff and little funding. According to Glassdoor.ca, a website that gives information on available jobs and companies, Oil Change International has no more than 50 employees and operates on less than $1 million Canadian per year. Where they get their funding from is a mystery. On their website, it simply states, Oil Change International is supported by generous foundation grants and many individual donations from our more than 200,000 supporters and online activists. We are deeply grateful for all their support. This tells us nothing about who and where Oil Change is funded from. We do know that the Tides Foundation and Rockefellers, but who else? I found a few on a website, Influence Watch. They are the V. Kahn Rasmussen Foundation, the Wallace Global Fund, as well as the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I know for a fact that the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation has also contributed to several other activist groups engaged in the tar sands campaign, such as Corp Ethics. Oil Change is part of the tar sands campaign as stated by themselves both on their website and in their 2016 annual report. They are another American company stationed in Washington, D.C. that is trying to infringe on Canada's sovereignty and tell us what to do. 350.org is particularly interesting. They are named that because of their main goal is to lower the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere from 400 parts per million to 350 parts per million. It has presented itself as a grassroots movement that has built itself up through the donations of its supporters and its recognition through political activism, but the truth is much different. It is a multi-million-dollar group with board members that make large salaries. They are active in many different countries all around the world. In 2015, their revenue was $11,279,955. Expenses were $8,906,848, and their assets was $5,137,543. It is difficult to know exactly how much 350.org receives in funding, since they do not disclose their funding. This is due to the organization being tax exempt under a 501c3, which means they do not have to release their funding information to any individuals or organizations. We do know, though, that they are funded by the Tides Foundation and Tom Steyer, a hedge fund billionaire who is heavily involved in environmental activism. We can also trace back that they have been receiving funds from the Rockefeller Brother Fund since 2012. Tom Steyer has worked for some of the biggest hedge funds, such as Farallon Capital Management, which is worth $30 billion. During the 2014 US midterm election, he invested more than $74 million in the Democrats, which made him one of the top political donors in 2014. In the 2018 midterms, he invested $120 million into the Democratic Party and has been a key figure in the Impeach Trump movement. He and his organization even put $13 million into Andrew Gillum's campaign. Steyer's move toward climate action and supporting the activist organizations that are against fossil fuels as well as the tar sands has been for the same reasons the Rockefellers and Soros have supported the cause. As I stated earlier, Steyers is co-founder and senior partner of Fallon Capital Management. Fallon Capital Management has invested in many companies in the fossil fuel industry, including in Indonesia and China. China has been for some time one of the biggest polluters. On the list of the top 100 polluters from 1988 to 2015, China is number one with 14.32% of global emissions. It is quite hypocritical to advocate for environmental causes while funding the largest polluters. Granted, he has since left Fallon Capital, but there is very little doubt that this is how he and the company made their fortunes, especially considering Steyers is worth more than $1 billion. CNN has played defense for both Soros and Steyer. In recent article, they reported on and condemned former House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy for a tweet he put out claiming Soros, Steyer, and Michael Bloomberg were buying off the election, each of them billionaire Jewish men. Ironically, these three men invested heavily in the Democrats during the midterms. Steyer's $120 million, Soros is another top donor, ranked number 5 in 2018, contributing a minimum of $15 million according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Michael Bloomberg, the third name listed, has also contributed to the 2018 midterms. It is reported that he has invested around $100 million to the Democrats in 2018 midterms. So, in a nutshell, McCarthy was right. 350.org takes credit for influencing Barack Obama changing his tune on climate change during the 2008 primaries for the presidential election. 350.org shares a lot of the same allies as Corp Ethics such as Greenpeace, the Sierra Club, Oil Changers International, and the Rainforest Action Network. They also list MoveOn.org, which is closely associated with Lead Now, who will be covered in part 2 of this series. These are Corp Ethics partners. These are a number of NGOs that have worked with Corp Ethics. They have listed a few of these organizations that they consider their closest allies. The one I have highlighted in red are the ones that have received their funding from the Tides Foundation. As we can see, 4 out of the 5 are funded by Soros' NGO. Corp Ethic also has a list of their clients that they have worked for and worked with. The list has some concerning and recognizable names on it. We see the Tides Foundation as one, but the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Rockefeller Family Fund are also on the list. This should tell you everything you need to know about Corp Ethics. They are not working to improve the environment or for the Canadian people, they are working to further the business interest of their donors. This campaign has been very successful so far, as most of the pipeline proposed over the last few years has been stopped. The Energy East pipeline was scrapped on October 5th, 2017. The Kinder Morgan pipeline was scrapped earlier this year, bought out by the government, and despite the fact they promised it would be built promptly, the project has remained in limbo for the last few months. When you put the welfare of your own citizens behind the profits of rich foreign elites, that, in my opinion, is treason.